Hi, everyone. So we're going to start here on the second presentation of our week here. I'm going to go ahead and bring up the presentation. I think that the screen share of me, the video, I got to use a new video recorder this week. I'm playing around a little bit with different recorders. I'll get you going here. We're talking about this week about well, we're talking about using IT for competitive advantage. In this presentation, the second one, I know we went a bit long on that other one. I'm going to go ahead and walk through. This is leveraging IT for strategic advantage. We talk about business cases specifically. Now we'll talk a little bit more about what your text for this week talks about, enterprise architecture strategy. And what we're looking at here is how do we not only look at our management and information services, but when you distill down, how do we set up an IT infrastructure really and understand what our architecture should be for both services, for the technology and all of that? How do you set that up to be strategic, right? And you don't necessarily think about it that way. A lot of times people think about their architecture as this, and then strategy is, now what are we going to go do? But what we're thinking about now this week is how do you set up your entire infrastructure, your enterprise architecture, in a way that gives you the flexibility to be strategic with the company and to support that. 48% of the companies out there, when they come into problems or they're not moving in a strategic direction, they're cutting waste from their IT budgets, right? They go to IT as a cost center. They haven't figured out how to increase value of IT, and that's what we're really trying to get through here. Understand your enterprise architecture, build a foundation for execution of IT infrastructure and services. So those processes that automate your company's core processes will be most effective in meeting the company's strategies. Again, like we've been talking about up until now, this relies on tight alignment between your business objectives and your IT capabilities. So the foundation for execution is the beginning of that. Typically, as we talked in strategic learning, strategic planning processes fail because they make sense, but they wind up implementing IT solutions in a stepwise fashion. And so by the time you get to phase 3 of your strategic plan, your customer set has changed and they expect more. And now you got to go back and start over, except now you're starting in strategic planning is going to be way behind and all that. So let me see, I don't know if you can see this little thing. I'm going to try to get rid of this little guy here. Oop. All right. So instead, carefully select which IT systems you're going to standardize and integrate. And you got 3 disciplines down that your book talks about. Number 1, identify your operating model. Okay, this is the necessary level of business process integration and standardization to deliver the goods and services of the company. 2, your enterprise architecture. What is your organizing logic for the business processes and the IT infrastructure? And that'll reflect integration and standardization requirements based on how your business is going to operate. And then 3, the IT engagement model, a system of governance mechanisms that will ensure that your business and your IT projects achieve local and company-wide objectives. So don't just kick everything off and hope it winds up right. You got to have some governance involved. This is the picture that shows that. I think this is out of your book. But you've got the learning strategy, right? How are we going to learn from our customers on a regular basis? We talked about that last week. What are our strategic initiatives? What are the big things that we've got to go do? All right. Then you get into this area where you've got a foundation for execution on the bottom. That's your core business processes, your IT infrastructure. An engagement model that's kind of always looking up and down between those. So you got strategic limits, you got your enterprise architecture there, and then your operating model is really defining how does integration standardization happen across your particular environment. You got engagement there where you're updating and evolving the architecture as you go, and you got priorities coming in over on the right side. You got learning and exploitation as you figure out opportunities and as you learn about the customer. On the right side, they're feeding back into the strategic initiatives. So you have this kind of constantly learning environment that's able to flex and move and support what your business needs to go do. That has to be structured around that foundation for execution so that you're not trying to constantly update something that is made for a different kind of business, because that'd be very frustrating. It isn't one size fits all. Your business agility is going to increasingly depend on this. You've got your political environment will require you to be able to be flexible here. Your national and like the regulatory environment. And in the end of the day, this is less risky and less expensive than the alternative, which is to go down some big one-size-fits-all approach that doesn't work for your business. You have to rely on foundation, doesn't magically appear. You have to rely on a good business operating model, good strategy, right, and good planning. So step one, defining that operating model. And there's two dimensions that it goes off of, each type of business. And we'll briefly go over those. Your book's going to go into a lot more detail. Integration. So across your organizational units, how are they sharing data? And the cost of integration is typically the cost of matching and mapping data across the businesses. And standardization. So from a process standpoint, how's everything going to be executed, regardless of who's outperforming it? How does it get executed? There's a cost associated with standardization, and that's the loss of local flexibility to meet varying demands. So you think about the way that well, let's just go into some of them. 4 types of operating models that will vary along those axes. So if you think about those two, the standardization high and low, and integration high and low, there's going to be 4 in that square, right? The first is coordination. So it's high integration, low standardization. So IT decisions will be made at the business units. The business units themselves will have control over it. This is really a organic growth. It allows for a stream of innovations to be quickly made available. So you have a lot of different operating units kind of doing their own thing. They're highly integrated with each other, but they're all operating at different standards. So it allows for innovation quickly. If you have acquisition, they have to integrate the data into the new customers for the existing products. Unification is very standardized, integrated processes. So high standardization, high coordination. Think of something like Coca-Cola, where it's the same basically everywhere, right? Every business is they operate the same thing. IT decisions can be made centrally. There's one IT group. Process owners design standardization processes. It leverages economies of scale, existing products, get them into new markets, right? They're taking how do we take what we do and sell it to other people? That's what they're focusing on. They can acquire competitors with the same foundation, but they have to rip and replace all the infrastructure with them. Diversification is when you have low integration and low standardization. So you've got various companies, think more like General Electric or like FMC, where there's a few standards across the business. The IT decisions are made by their own business unit. So IT is kind of located everywhere. Company grows basically through the business unit growth. Okay, each of the business units grows themselves. That allows the bigger company to there are unlimited opportunities for acquisition. They just basically buy them, sell based on shareholder value. Replication is going to be the 4th one. It's got low integration, but high standardization. So standardization on the data definitions, but locally owned and centrally mandated IT services. So they may go back to a common sort of approach to how to store and manage deep data, but they're going to do the services differently as they move in different businesses. Think about more on the healthcare side, where you might have a common data set for the healthcare, but your clinics, your hospitals, they're going to have different processes, at-home stuff. They can acquire competitors, but they got to rip and replace all the processes as they bring them in so they can get to the data. Organic growth, they're going to replicate best practices in new markets and innovations and extend globally. 3 main business strategies, and we've talked about this before. You can be operationally excellent, right? You can be customer intimate, or you can be product leadership. You got to pick 1 or 2 of those really to be successful. You can't do all 3 and have that be the driving force, because if your operational excellence is your driving force, it's by definition gonna get in the way of some of your customer intimacy and project leadership. You got to decide which one of those is going to be, and then implement your architecture based on that. Step 2 of this: implement your enterprise architecture, your organizing logic. Capture it in a core diagram, understand it, share the data driving those core processes, and identify your key linking and automation technologies and your key customers. I've got examples here, and this is straight out of your book, and literally took snapshots of it. Unification. So if you have a unification kind of architecture and unified kind of business, that's how the business operates. Now it wants to operate. And look at that. You've got all the data in the middle, right? Unified. And you've got this set of business processes up there that you can automate, right? And you've got different customer types all using it the same way. This is how Coca-Cola does it. Diversification, very different. You got a tech stack there, right? Different companies, separated technologies, separated processes. Data is not shared. There's low integration, low standardization. Coordination. You got a kind of company where you see all these business processes there. They're all separated, managed by their own business units, but they have a single data share that they're operating. So high integration, low standardization. And then replication, you got a kind of company there where you're just kind of moving it and replacing it and adding stuff in. You see the business processes there, separated. They're technology around each of them, but data really isn't even part of the picture here. You got low integration, high standardization, but low integration of the data. And then all throughout this, you got governance. And this is just a chart to talk to. When you think about governance, again, when we briefly mentioned this in the last one, always have an IS steering committee. You want to be, it needs to be driven not by IS, okay? And this is one of the mistakes that we tend to make, is that we tend to want to have technology people guiding the technology. You don't want that. You want the business guiding the technology. Everything we just talked about in terms of how the business runs, these are business ideas, right? So they come from all the areas of the business. You want those people to be driving what they need out of IS. And you don't want anyone from IS and a voting member on the group. You can have someone on there to kind of guide, realism and that kind of thing. But you need to have executive management, so sponsors, right, for all the big things that need to happen. And the big thing about the executive management is that when you get sponsorship of the technology, it becomes, you get less into the situation where technology is trying to sell itself to the company, which makes you more of a cost center. You get in a position where the company is pulling new technology in, which makes you part of the success of the company. It makes you part of the overall implementation. So IS is good for sanity check and idea factory, and also, for vendor review and implementation teams. But that's what you want to think about when you talk about governance. So when you look at business value, then enhancing the value of product or service, creating value for the company, what you want to talk about here is four or three different factors, sets of factors that are going to drive your business value. There's operational factors, right? Those that impact the cash flow through increased efficiency or growth, cost, those things that are like day-to-day kinds of things that you need to manage. And then there's financial, what we call financial factors. There you're dealing with a little bit longer term things, cost of capital, big investments, debt level, those kinds of things that you got to manage. And then sustainability. What are the things that are going to enable the business to continue functioning optimally for a long time? Those are like government regulations, industry standards. So you can influence those operational ones really well. You can influence the second set on a yearly basis kind of thing. Sustainability is the things you got to think through in your operating model to say, I don't necessarily control all these. How do we be successful in this kind of environment and have an operating model that allow us to manage the first ones, manage the second ones, and still keep going in an environment that we don't necessarily control, those sustainability options. The maturity of your enterprise architecture is going to require that you necessarily build the plane while you're flying it, right? Because these things take time. You're gonna have to in order to be reasonably successful in this, you've got to break it into some steps. And we kind of reflect that. Your book kind of talks through that. Say, all right, you might be nowhere to start with, but let's at least go through these steps and start getting ourselves to a place of success. And really 4 is where you want to get to. But the first one's going to be, business silo architecture. Just get enough of an architecture in place that your individual business unit needs can be met. Second one is to standardize on that. All right. So now we're going to get efficiencies through standardized technologies. And you can measure that by the amount of overlap of technologies that are there, the amount of time that you can implement something across multiple businesses. Third, you want to optimize that core architecture. So now you're getting to data and process standardization. All right, not just technology, but actual data and process standardization across the business. And the fourth one then is business modularity, where you can create these loosely coupled IT business process components to preserve global standards while enabling local differences. So you plug and play, but every time you plug something in, it connects right, connects automatically, and everyone knows how to do that particular thing when it's employed. That increasing maturity requires that, there's going to be a lot of learning, okay? So it's going to take time. Let's get it right and spend the time to sort of focus on making sure the architecture is right. Don't skip those stages. Don't try to go to 4 and try to implement something that's very extensible and flexible if you haven't figured out how to make money for the business, because you'll get killed. So that one will be like, they won't understand what you're doing. You won't necessarily make it there, and it'll be tough. Focus those efforts on the strategic processes. Okay, so focus what you're doing on the things that are going to make the most difference for the company, and move incrementally. There's a high likelihood of failure if you try to do too much too quick. And recognize there are other architecture levels you may need to account for. So just because I've said there are 4, there may be, because of your business, some different things that are happening in different areas. Be sensitive to that, and if it makes sense, change a little bit. But just understand that there is a maturity level you're trying to do. The last one, build it in-house. make sure it's your people doing this. Don't get a consulting company to do this, because once they leave, you've got to understand enough about your architecture to be able to maneuver through this each year as you learn more about strategy, as you learn more about your customization. So how do you build incrementally? There's just 5 principles here, or 5 key decision areas that are going to drive where those investments need to be made. High-level decisions about the strategic role of IT. Those are your IT principles. You've got to have governance over those. You got to have governance over the enterprise architecture, right? That organizing logic that we talked about. You got to have governance over the IT infrastructure. So the actual infrastructure itself, how are we managing that? Your business application needs, right? Business requirements for purchased or internally developed IT applications that are going to ride on top of the infrastructure, which is defined by the architecture, which is shaped by the principles. And your last one is prioritization investment, okay? So once you've got those 4 layers up there, then you're going to be making decisions about where do you want to prioritize? What's strategic for us to do? There should be governance over that process as well, so that we keep ourselves always making the right decisions and making it in an environment that's effective and is going to be productive for the company. So I said don't use a consulting firm. It can be useful to bring some outsourcing in, not necessarily given a competitive environment, to actually develop parts of this product. That's okay. Okay. Most people will outsource some, not most of the actual product itself, and some will outsource services. Just make sure you're defining your architecture in a way that you understand it and that you can manage it going forward. There's 3 kinds that we talked about, I think, in your book. There's strategic partnerships, where multiple vendors provide an integrated set of operational services. So that's like, you do this part, you do this part, both use it, great. Co-sourcing alliances, where we engage together sort of with clearly delineated responsibilities. Useful a lot of times when you don't have all the skill sets that you need, so it's more of a functional basis kind of partnership. And then transactional, which is really just processes or tasks. If you clearly delineate particular parts that someone's going to go do, that's really just having a supplier in. But outsourcing can be used. Just make sure you're managing that and owning how you want to do that. If senior executives don't know whether they're getting a good value from IT, it's a sure bet that they aren't. That's what you need to come back to. We can't be in conflict, or we can't be like having our feelings hurt because someone doesn't, what's IT doing for me? If they don't know, that's our problem. We need to go make sure they understand that. Analyze your existing foundation for execution, define your operating model, design your enterprise architecture, set priorities, design and implement an engagement model, and exploit that foundation for growth, okay? When we execute this and you do it with governance, with the business driving your IS steering, then you're not going to be in that position. You're going to be in a good position for moving forward. You'll have that foundation for success. Just a few bullets here. Again, commit to the foundation, whatever you've decided on. Initiate change from the top, remove those barriers, experiment with it. If it needs to change a little bit, that's fine. Just go do it and be smart about it. Use the architecture as a compass and a communication tool. So as you're developing things, make sure you're sharing what this is going to wind up looking like. And don't try to go too fast. Don't skip stages. Okay? Be successful. Move to the next level that will make you be successful. Implement one project at a time. If you need to get successful capabilities incorporated in it, then you can outsource. You define it yourself, but you can bring in strategic partners to cover parts of it. Keep investing in your own people so that as you build this out, you've got people that are really understanding both the technology and infrastructure, but also the business and why it's important to the business and why we have some of these systems there. Reward that enterprise kind of thinking and empower your employees with that foundation for execution.